Welcome to Botany 101. My name is Angela Nishimoto. Now today, before we get into today's lessons, we're going to do a little bit of a review from last time, since I know that it was pretty overwhelming probably, yes? So if we could go to the Elmo, we'll take a look and see the components of a plant cell, right? Recall when we saw them last time, yes, that the cell is surrounded, okay, by something called a cell wall, yes. Exterior to the cell wall, you'll have the middle lamella, which is the area between one cell and another one, adjacent to each other, yeah. So the outermost part of a plant cell should be its cell wall, right? Remember too, that you can have a primary cell wall and in some instances, secondary cell walls as well, okay? So plants have the cell walls as support, okay, exterior support to the cell. It helps the cell hold its shape, yes? Then inside of the cell, we have the cytoplasm. This is the liquid inside of the cell, yes? And in the cytoplasm, you have organelles. And chief among the organelles, or actually all of them are very important, but among those that are most important include the chloroplasts, right? Remember the chloroplasts tend to be green, and they have the stacks of thylakoid membranes making up the grana, and the fluid or the jelly-like substance inside of the chloroplast is called the stroma. Okay, remember that? And the chloroplast also has a double membrane surrounding it. Next, we also have what is usually colored red when you see an image or you see a model of the cell, okay, the plant cell, and these are representing the mitochondria. Remember, the mitochondria, okay, are responsible for most of cellular respiration, similar to the fact that the chloroplasts do photosynthesis, okay? All right, so those are two organelles inside of the plant body. Now we also have the membranous organelles, including the ER, the endoplasmic reticulum. Usually the membrane of the ER is attached to the membrane of the nucleus, contiguous with it. You have the rough ER and you have the smooth ER. The rough ER being responsible for usually, mostly, the production of proteins, and the smooth ER being responsible for the production of lipids and other substances. Then you have another membranous organelle known as a Golgi apparatus, and this is where the cell, the cell actually moves substances from the ER into the Golgi, in organelles called vesicles. And then what happens is that generally it just moves through the different stacks of membranes. It's like a stack of pancakes, and eventually the Golgi will finish and package and then move it out of the Golgi, and it'll generally leave the cell through a vesicle. Okay, so we have ER and we have the Golgi, two membranous organelles. Let's see, and prominent here, depicted here, is the organelle known as the central vacuole. The central vacuole is, of course, present in plant cells, right? It holds watery substance known as cell sap. Things like lemons and oranges, that kind of sour tasting liquid that comes out of it mostly comes from the material that's inside the central vacuole. That's where lemons get their sour taste, from substances, acid substances within the vacuole of lemons, lemon fruit. And also, so you have sometimes pigments such as anthocyanins, responsible for pigmentation of red onion, and in some cases some flowers or fruits, etc. And you also have occlusions. You have salts, you have crystals, like the raphides in tea. Remember, in kalo. Remember we talked about kalo last time? So the raphides, or the crystals, calcium oxalate crystals, are responsible for the itchy throat that you get if you eat any part of the kalo when it's not cooked enough, yes? Okay, so also you have salts, sugars, proteins, all kinds of stuff held in the central vacuole. Another thing about the central vacuole is that it provides for internal support of the cell. It is due to the expansion, okay, and the enlargement of the central vacuole that allows for the expansion and enlargement of a single cell, okay? Another kind of organelle that is within the plant cell are something that we can't really see in this chart. We can see a little bit maybe. It's called the cytoskeleton. And the cytoskeleton is made up of microfilaments, intermediate filaments, and also microtubules. And they provide another form of support for from the interior of the cell. So the plant cell has a cell wall to support it. It also has a central vacuole that plays an important role in internal support. And thirdly, we have the cytoskeleton that allows for the organelles to kind of stay where they are. They're sort of like structures inside our bodies that keep, say, our pancreas from kind of sloshing, into the nearest organ next to it or anything. Yep. And then lastly, we talked about the nucleus of the cell. The nucleus with its double membrane around it, and then you have the nuclear pores that allow certain things to exit the nucleus and might allow certain things to enter the nucleus. Here we also see the nucleolus, okay? Nucleolus is responsible for producing the components of ribosomes, and if you recall, ribosomes are places where proteins are actually assembled inside of the cell. And here you can see some depiction of diffuse genetic material, and that is the genetic material which is nucleic acid called DNA plus protein forming the chromatin. Remember, chromatin is colored threads, whereas when the material condenses and coils and supercoils and you can actually see visibly bodies, those are called chromosomes. Yes, and chromosomes are something that we talked about last time. We went through the 4 stages of mitosis, including prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase, and we also went through the important events during these phases, plus cytokinesis as well. Yes, cytokinesis, which means cell division. So the division of the division of the nucleus is called mitosis, and then the division of the cell itself is called cytokinesis. Anyway, so today's lesson is going to be on the plant body. So far we've seen the plant from subatomic particles to the atom, and then we also have seen the different atoms coming together in chemical bonding to form molecules, and we also have the molecules forming macromolecules, and then now, okay, we have the different kind of macromolecules forming parts of the plant cell. Yes? And so you have these different parts of the plant cell, and then what happens is that next we're going to talk about the body of the plant. And of course, since plants are living things, you remember when we were talking about the different qualities of things that are alive? Well, one of the things that qualifies something as being a living thing is that it is comprised of a cell or more than one cell. So living things are cellular, right? Okay, so today we're going to do the plant body. Okay. Now, objectives for today, 2 general questions. Okay, what are these things called? Tissues, all right? That's one thing we're going to kind of address. Another thing we're going to address is what kind of plant tissues are they, okay, and what do they form, all right? So first of all, tissues. What are they? Okay, tissues are groups of cells. They're a grouping of cells that do a certain function, all right? So tissues are groups of cells that perform a common function together. You have different types of cells, and they kind of work together to do a certain job, right? So these tissues, and so the tissues, which are groups of cells, you have different tissues that comprise what we call the organs of the plant. So the plant organs that need concern us today include the root, okay? The root is usually the underground portion of the stem of the plant. It's not always underground, but oftentimes it is. Okay, so here you see roots. What do? They actually go into the soil or some other substrate. They help to support the above ground portion of the plant. Another thing roots do is they take in water. All right. Let's say so. Root, one kind of what we call vegetative organs of the plant. Okay. The second vegetative organ is called the stem. Okay, what does the stem do? The stem helps support the leaves, and it also forms a structure that allows water to come from the roots into the stem and then into the leaves, all right? And of course, the third vegetative organ of the plant that we're going to try to cover today includes the leaves. And what do the leaves do? Think about it. They do photosynthesis, right? So part of what they do in photosynthesis, they have structures in the leaves that allow for carbon dioxide gas to enter the leaf and oxygen gas to leave the leaf, okay, through the same structures, okay? So we have photosynthesis, okay, happening in the leaves, right? Now, in terms of plant tissues, okay, we're going to get into different tissues that are specialized for certain tasks. And one of these plant tissues is called the meristem. Okay, the plant meristems are the places where you have active cell division. For us people, remember in our last lecture we said that part of the function of mitosis is for growth. Secondly, mitosis happens for repair, and in some cases it allows for asexual reproduction. So generally in a plant, growth usually occurs mostly at these areas called meristems. Okay, these are places of active cell division. Yes? Okay, so this is where growth occurs in the plant. This is where most of the growth will occur. Okay, and so we have two different kinds of growth in flowering plants and other kinds of plants. We have primary growth. Okay, primary growth is generally growth in an up and down direction, or a longitudinal growth that increases the plant size in length. Okay, or in up and down, or side to side. Okay, that's kind of confusing. Actually, think about primary growth as being primarily in the up and down direction. We also have secondary growth. Okay, secondary growth comes from what we call lateral meristems. So the apical meristems are generally located at the tips of shoots and at the tips of roots. Secondary meristems occur in the lateral sections of the stem and the root. Okay. And so these meristems will give rise to certain tissues, right? And let's see, the tissues include three types, okay? We have dermal tissue, we have ground tissue, and we have vascular tissue, okay? And here we can see two examples of apical meristems. In this case here, the image on the left, we have a nice image of a flower. Yeah, and in this case, the flower, okay, comes from a terminal bud at the very tip of the stem. All right, and here we'll actually see, a part of a root. Yes, this is like a single root of a plant. Okay, and this root here, okay, has the apical meristem at the very tip. Okay, we're going to get into a little bit later the structure of the root, the internal structure, as well as some of the external structures. Okay, right now I would like to, show you something, okay, on the Elmo, right? So here, okay, here we actually have, what does it look like? Do you recognize this? Yes? It's actually the head of a cabbage, of course, yes? And what is cabbage? What part of the cabbage do you usually eat? You think about it, you eat the leaves usually, yeah? And of course the leaves are above ground portion of the plant, and they do come from what we call the apical meristem. So if you actually look at this section, this is like a cabbage cut in half longitudinally, and here you can see that here's a stem with the leaves coming off of it, off the side, and then up here, okay, this area here is the part of the cabbage that's called the meristem. Okay, right here is the place where, until it was cut, this plant would have been actively growing. And this place, the meristem, will produce the tissues that give rise to the stem and the leaf, okay? So you have the apical meristem of a shoot of a plant. And in this case, we have the cabbage, right? Okay, let's see. Next, okay, we also have tissues known as dermal tissues, okay? So these dermal tissues are generally the most exterior part of the plant. They comprise the outermost layer of, okay, non-woody plants, all right? And the outermost layer of non-woody plants is called the epidermis, just like in humans, all right? And generally this epidermis, okay, has a substance on it called cuticle. Do you remember cuticle? We talked about cuticle before, and cutin, when you're touching a piece of a plant, okay, and it's kind of waxy, okay, it's kind of waxy and slippery, generally because it has this cuticle, okay, on it. And the cuticle on the leaves and the stem help the plant and keep it from losing too much water. Okay, because we know that water is lost through the stomates. I think we talked about that a little bit before, but generally, okay, from these plants too, okay, you have the coating of cuticle that kind of makes it waxy, yes? Remember what waxes are in terms of what kind of chemical compound it is? Do you remember what waxes are? What kind of macromolecules are waxes? They're lipids, remember they're lipids, yeah? So what they are is they're hydrophobic, so they prevent water loss from the plant. And in some cases, in our bodies too, we have sebaceous glands that kind of secrete oily fluids that kind of keep our skins impermeable from keeping it from losing too much water. Yes. Okay. Now another part on top of the epidermis of some parts of the plant is called the stomates or stomata. Okay. Remember stomates and stomata, or they're actually generally on leaves usually. Okay. So here we have a very good schematic diagram, and this is showing not only the epidermis in terms of this is a cross section of a leaf, of a dicot leaf. Remember dicots and monocots we talked about a little earlier? We're going to talk about them a little bit more today too. But just see that this is the upper epidermis, yeah, with these, individual cells comprising just one layer, and on top of that you have that waxy layer called the cuticle, okay, made up of cutin among other substances. Then we have what we call the middle leaf or mesophyll. Mesophyll literally means the middle of the leaf. So we'll have palisade cells, we also have spongy cells. But see here on the lower epidermis also, you also have epidermal cells, cuticle, and then you'll have two special cells called guard cells. And what do? They guard the stomate. The stoma or the stomate is actually the pore or the hole, okay, inside that leads from outside of the plant to the inside of the plant. And as I mentioned before, carbon dioxide can diffuse into the leaf, okay, through the stomate, and oxygen gas. Remember, oxygen gas is a byproduct of photosynthesis. The plant takes in carbon dioxide and water, okay, carbon dioxide through the stomate of the leaf, and also water from the root, and it actually makes and does, biochemical reactions and transforms the, solar energy using these substances to make chemical energy in the form of sugars, okay, and other substances, all right? Okay, so plant tissues, yes. Okay, so we have dermal tissues, and they form the outermost layer, and now other tissues that have to do with the outermost part of a plant, okay, include bark or cork. So here we have a very nice image, very wizened image of bark making up the stem of this woody plant. So remember that generally the epidermis is the outermost layer of a non-woody plant or herbaceous plant. Bark or cork is the external layer or layers on woody plants. These are things like shrubs and also shrubs and trees, okay? We call too, if we can go to the Elmo, okay, we have here the bark, okay, this is Melaleuca bark, or also known as paper bark, all right? And so this is bark, and remember that bark is non-living tissue. Bark comes from a secondary meristem called the cork cambium. All right, so bark is non-living tissue of the plant, but it serves, of course, to protect, okay, the tissues underneath it, all right? And we call too, okay, we also saw, okay, a section of a plant. This is probably tilia or basswood, and you can see here that the exterior part here, okay, this is bark, the non-living part. Now this whole thing, of course, is non-living now. But when the plant, before it was cut down and sawed into pieces, this was alive, and then you have here the bark toward the outside produced from cork cambium, probably in this layer here. And then toward the inside here, you have vascular tissue, secondary xylem produced from secondary growth. So we're going to look at that in a little bit, okay, when we look at the vascular tissues. Okay, and now bark and cork, they're actually impregnated with a substance known as suberin. They kind of help make them impervious to moisture. It kind of keeps the inside of the, the bark, the inside of the bark, the living part of the tree. It keeps the outside moisture from getting in and thereby creating rot in the plant. So it kind of helps, yes, for that. Okay, now we also have ground tissues, and ground tissues are made up of three basic kinds of cells. First of all, you have something called parenchyma. Parenchyma cells are among the most versatile. They can have different shapes. One thing that they all have in common is that they're all very thin-walled. And here's a nice micrograph, okay, of part of a cattail flower stalk. Okay, so these are parenchyma cells, and one of the things you can see is that the cell wall is very thin. Okay, so generally parenchyma cells are thin-walled, and they're a result of primary growth. Okay, or growth just from the primary meristem, also known as the apical meristem. Okay, then we also have another kind of tissue known as parenchyma. okay? So parenchyma is a main kind of support tissue. So parenchyma is there to help support the plant, help it stay upright, okay? And these generally have cell walls that are unevenly thickened, okay? They're usually not, uniform in terms of thickness. And in fact, in terms of your text, okay, you do have images, okay, of parenchyma, parenchyma, and sclerenchyma. So you can take a look at that, and you will be able to see that the parenchyma cells, they're long and fibrous, and they will actually have unevenly thickened cell walls. So they look sort of like cobblestones, okay, in a way. And and we're showing you the celery here because celery is a good example. Celery that we eat, a part of it is generally the petiole or the leaf stem of the celery plant. And the stringy stuff that you have in there, that's actually parenchyma cells. Okay, they tend to be long and skinny and stringy. Okay, so parenchyma is a second kind of ground tissue that we see, okay, in some plants. Now another type is called sclerenchyma, and sclerenchyma also functions in support as well. Okay, and generally sclerenchyma has two types. Let's see. So we also want to mention that sclerenchyma also results from secondary growth, and secondary growth, they have secondary cell walls. All right. So you can see here in this image, okay, you have here these cells. These are fiber cells, I believe. You can see that usually when they make prepared slides of cells, generally secondary growth will have this kind of reddish color to it because that's the way they stain it, that these secondary cell walls tend to stain red, okay? So you can see how thick the cell walls over here, all right? Okay, so here we have the secondary cell walls, okay, of these cells, and these are called fiber cells. Okay, so these are fibers, and then there are other kinds of cells called sclerides. Sclerides can also be called stone cells. When you're eating a pear, okay, and you have the kind of gritty stuff in your teeth it's delicious, of course, but it has a little bit of grit in it. Those are actually what they call sclerides or stone cells, okay? All right, now the third kind of tissue, so we talked about dermal tissue a little bit, talking about the epidermis and other external coverings of the plants, whether they're herbaceous or they're woody. And we also talked about a little bit about ground tissue, parenchyma, parenchyma, and sclerenchyma. Now we're going to talk about vascular tissues, okay? Now in vascular tissues, they actually comprise what we know of as veins. Recall that we saw before, let's see, a leaf with veins in it, yes? So the veins are actually vascular tissues, and they're generally of two main types in plants, okay? In flowering plants especially, you have xylem, okay? So what does xylem do? Xylem moves water, okay? It actually brings up water from the soil, okay? Moves it through the root, okay, through the stem, into the leaves, and out of the leaves, okay, through the stomates. Right? Xylem also moves dissolved substances such as minerals that the plant takes up from the soil around it or from wherever it's growing. Okay. Now, generally, the xylem, okay, is made up of several different kinds of cells, and the two cells that are specialized for xylem tissue are called tracheids and vessel elements. So these kinds of cells, tracheids and vessel elements have secondary growth because they have secondary cell walls. So here in this micrograph, you can see that here we have some xylem vessel elements here. Okay. So these vessel elements and even the tracheids are sort of like pipes. They're like connected end to end. Okay, one vessel element connected to the next vessel element, so they form pipe-like structures inside of the plant body. Okay, in the root, in the stem, and also in the leaves. And so the main thing to remember is that two of the types of cells in xylem are tracheids and vessel elements. These are the two main kind of cells specialized just for xylem. So remember that xylem moves water through the plant. Actually takes up water, moves it through the root, into the stem, into the leaves, and out of the leaves, into the atmosphere through the stomata, okay, the stomates. Okay, so this vascular tissue, okay, so xylem, okay, is comprised of fibers and also parenchyma cells, as well as tracheids and vessel elements as well. Okay, so xylem is comprised of those 4 different types of cells: parenchyma cells, fiber cells, tracheids, and vessel elements. Okay, so generally, primary cell xylem results from primary growth. And do you remember what primary growth is? Yes. Primary growth comes from the apical meristems. Okay, so primary growth is growth in an up and down direction. Okay, up and down or in a lengthwise direction. Okay, resulting in primary types of cells. Okay. Now, when we have secondary xylem, that comes from secondary growth, okay? And secondary growth is growth from the secondary meristems, which include the vascular cambium, and it also includes the cork cambium. Remember, we talked about the cork cambium being responsible for growth of cork or bark, all right? Okay, so here, very, very nice image. We have here, okay, this is a cross-section of a stem of a dicot. Okay, we're going to get into dicots and monocots in a bit, all right? So interior here is what would have been left from primary growth. Remember, primary growth is growth in an up and down direction. But after the plant, is over a year old, in woody plants, what will happen is this area here that just kind of surrounds this area right here, usually only 1 or 2 cells thick, this is the meristem called vascular cambium. Call it vascular cambium because it's a meristem that produces vascular tissue. Generally, it produces xylem. So these are all xylem cells, xylem tissues. Secondary xylem produced by the secondary meristem known as the vascular cambium. Okay, the cork cambium should be up here somewhere because it's very thin and it produces bark. Okay, toward the outside, right? So this vascular cambium will produce phloem cells toward the outside, secondary phloem cells, and secondary xylem toward the inside. So this is a very nice image showing secondary xylem. Here we have 1, 2, 3 rings of secondary xylem. Okay, and then interior to that would be the primary xylem, because what would have happened was, as the plant was growing in a lengthwise direction, the plant would have made xylem. Xylem, what do they call them? Vascular bundles. Okay. Now, when these vascular bundles, would be there, and then in the next year of growth, when the vascular cambium would have connected to each other, producing this ring here, okay, this ring here would have been produced in the first year of growth, after the first year of growth, during the second year of growth. Then this other ring here would be produced in the third year of growth. Then this last ring here would be produced in the 4th year of growth. So when you're looking at a section of a woody dicot, if you count these rings from here to here, that's 1, from here to here, and from here to here, you have 3 rings of xylem. So that means that the stem would have been about 4 years old when they cut it down and made the slide. Okay, so secondary xylem comes from the secondary meristem known as the vascular cambium. Remember, vascular and vascular tissue includes a xylem, yes, as well as a phloem. Okay, now phloem, okay, is another kind of tissue. Remember that xylem moves water in the plant, so phloem moves organic substances such as sugar, okay, and other things like that, right? Sugars, different kinds of sugars, okay, including glucose and etc. So 2 of the specialized cells that are specialized for phloem, okay, include sieve tube members and their companion cells, all right? Now, xylem, vessel elements, and also tracheids are non-living when they're functional. They do exactly function like pipes inside of the plant. They're linked end to end, okay, and they're like pipes. And when they're functional, they're not alive anymore. When, of course, when they came about from the result of cell division, of course, they would have had nucleus and mitochondria and everything inside that they would have needed. But as they mature, they have the secondary growth to make the secondary cell walls around them, right? Then what will happen is that the insides will drop out and they'll form these tubes, yeah, through which you can actually move water up in the plant. So they're like plumbing inside of the plant, okay? Now the phloem is a little bit different because with the sieve tube members and the companion cells, these cells are alive when they're functional, okay? So sieve tube members and companion cells. Usually the sieve tube members are fairly large, and the companion cells are usually smaller, right? And the companion cells usually have a fairly large nucleus. So people believe that the sieve tube members are where sugar is actually loaded into and moved from one place of the plant to another place of the plant, because generally sugar moves from a source to a sink. We'll get into that later, All right, so the sieve tube members are like the pipes through which a sugar solution will move, and the companion cells, people think that companion cells function in helping to load the sieve tube members with sugar solution, okay? Anyway, so the phloem is made of a sieve tube members and also companion cells. Furthermore, you also have fibers in here too, and also parenchyma cells. So 4 different types of cells in phloem as well. You have the sieve tube members and companion cells. These are cells that are most specialized for movement, okay, of sugar inside of the plant. Okay, remember too, just remember this, and we'll expand upon it later on, probably in the lecture after next. Okay, either the next lecture or the lecture after that. And these help to load the sugar and move it from a source to a sink, because sugar can actually move from up to down to up, to side. You know, it actually moves sugar from where it's either made or stored to where it's used or stored, okay, depending on what the plant wants to do, okay? Then we have fiber cells and parenchyma cells that also comprise phloem tissues, all right? So here too, we have primary phloem resulting from primary growth or growth of at the apical meristems, and then we have secondary phloem resulting from secondary growth, or in this case, you have growth from the vascular cambium, just like in the xylem. Okay, the xylem is produced, the secondary xylem is produced from the vascular cambium toward the inside of the plant. Secondary, so the vascular tissue or xylem is produced inwards, and the phloem is produced outwards. Okay, that's why the plant can keep growing in diameter, yeah, over many years. Okay. All right, next we're going to get into the vegetative organs of the plant that we kind of did a little foreshadowing about before. And the plant organs include the vegetative organs, which are the roots, of course, the stems, and the leaves, right? And so recall that what are the functions of the roots? The roots do anchorage. They help to anchor the plant to a substrate of some kind. Because remember, plants are sessile. They only stay in one place. Okay? So roots help to anchor the plant, whether the plant is growing in the soil. In that case, some people can refer to that as a terrestrial plant, with the roots anchoring the plant in the soil. You also have other kinds of plants known as epiphytes. Epiphytes means a plant that grows on another plant. Epi is just like your epidermis, yeah, on top of. Your epidermis is layers on top of your dermis, yeah, so the epidermis. So the epi means on top of, and phyte refers to plant, P-H-Y-T-E. So epiphytes are actually plants that grow on other plants. And in some tropical areas, they include things like orchids, you know, different kinds of plants such as orchids and tillandsias and bromeliads, as well as, let's see, mosses and ferns and other, you know, sort of what they call lower vascular plants, okay? So roots function to anchor the plant, whether holding them tight onto another plant or whether anchoring them into a soil. So you have terrestrial plants, you also have epiphytes, okay? So anchorage is one thing that the roots do, all right? A second function, these are 2 main functions of the roots, anchorage and secondly, absorption. So the second main function of a root is to absorb water and dissolve substances, so the plant, that the plant needs, of course, yes? All right? So we also have the fact, you know, that we have tap roots and fibrous roots if the plant develops the roots from a seed, okay? Recall from your reading, you should have been reading about this by now. So generally tap roots, okay, what kind of different kinds of plants do tap roots come from? Okay, kind of think about that for a second, all right? Okay, tap roots, okay, actually come, okay, from dicot plants, right? Dicots with 2 cotyledons. Okay, and here you can see this is a little weed called neruri, and you can see here, okay, if you kind of look at it, okay, we see here that I like to show a live plant because sometimes when you're actually looking at an image, they show you the best case scenario, you know, and the plants don't always look that way. So here in this neruri plant, you see a little bit of a thicker root. So a tap root in dicots, okay, generally developed from a seedling or a plant that germinates from a seed. And then here, because remember, plants can do sexual reproduction sometimes, and they can do asexual reproduction. So here, this one is a little bit thicker than the others, and this would be the taproot of this particular plant, okay? All right? Now, okay, we also have what we call fibrous roots, okay? And here, okay, look at this. Okay, so here, this is a grass. I don't know what kind of grass it is. grasses are not my specialty, but still interesting. So you can see here that you have all these little roots coming from this, and this is also a good example of a plant that has what we call a stolon, yeah, as a propagule. And you can see that the roots coming from these areas of the plants are all uniform. They're all about the same size. Okay, so these are what they call fibrous roots, and you can see that grasses generally are plants that have fibrous roots. Okay, and grasses are monocots, right? Okay, so taproots come from plants that have germinated from seeds and from dicot seeds. Remember, dicots have two little cotyledons, right? Two little seed leaves when they're germinating, and monocots tend to have one cotyledon, such as corn and grasses and orchids. Okay. Now we also have the fact that inside of the root, okay, we have lateral sections, okay, of the root. Let's see. And we're going to take a look at that, all right? So the lateral section of a root. So for one thing, at the very tip, you have something called the root cap. What does the root cap do? The root cap is usually made of a fairly large cells that can slough off pretty well, as the root is pushing itself through the soil. Because you remember that the tip of the root, just like the tip of the shoot, develops from a primary meristem. So this root cap, the main function of that is to protect the meristem, because of course the meristem has very delicate cells. These are brand new cells, okay? They need to be protected. So the root cap is generally at the very tip of the root, okay? Secondly, we also have the meristem, okay, and this is an area where you have a zone of cell division happening. And then you also have, okay, so we have the meristem, all right? So this here, we can see that this part here with the large, you can kind of see a little bit that these cells are large. Now this is the root cap area, okay? This area that's kind of colored, this pinkish kind of color, this would be the zone of active cell division, or the apical meristem here, right? Furthermore, okay, as we work our way up the root, okay, so we actually have an image too, okay, you'll have an area called the area of elongation. So remember that the cells will divide. Remember what process actually allows a division of cells? You have mitosis and you have cytokinesis. Remember, we just did that last time, yes? So here in this model, okay, we have the area, here we have the root cap, okay, protecting the delicate tender cells behind it. Then here we'll have the area of cell division, meristem cells. Then furthermore, you can kind of see a little bit that the cells are small to start with, and then as you move up, the cells get longer. So you have an area of elongation, or the zone of elongation. Furthermore, when you get to this area here, we see with this little thing coming out here, it's like the beginning of what they call root hairs. This is what they call the area of maturation, okay? Generally, the area of maturation is where the root hairs develop, because root hairs are very, very delicate, okay? So generally, you would not find them in the lower part of the root, because this is actually pushing through the soil. This area here is pushing through the soil, with these cells being sloughed off, okay? Because remember, these are plants and these are living things, so they're growing, yeah? Because that's one of the qualities of living things also, is that you have growth happening. So what happens is this is actually pushing itself through the soil as the cells are dividing here, and then the cells are elongating. So little by little, this thing is moving through the soil, okay? So you have the root cap, you have the meristem, you have the zone of elongation, or where the cells are expanding and getting bigger due to the fact that the vacuole is taking up water and expanding the cell. And then later on here, up here, you'll have the zone of maturation, because of course the root hairs can't really exist in the lower part of the root because this is being pushed to the soil. They'd be sloughed off and they wouldn't be able to do their job, okay? Alrighty, so generally, in this lateral section, you have these different zones, yeah, including the zone of maturation with the root hairs. And here's a beautiful, really, really nice photograph, okay, showing root hairs. Okay, so here you can see that generally toward the tip of the root, there are no root hairs. So this would be the root cap. You can even see that in this. This is an excellent photograph. The root cap, the meristem would be right behind it. Here you can see the cells are getting bigger, so this is the zone of elongation. Then here you have the zone of maturation, where you have these root hairs. Root hairs are very, very delicate. They actually look like fungus, or like little threads coming out. In fact, when we sometimes when we do our experiment, in the lab, people will think that the white fuzzy stuff coming off the root is actually fungus, but it's not. They're actually root hairs. Root hairs are single-celled extensions, okay, of the epidermis. So they're very delicate, very easy to damage. Yeah, so very important. Why are they important? They're sort of like the villi inside of our digestive system. What they do is that they will actually expand and increase the surface area, okay, of the root to allow for more water absorption, more nutrient absorption, okay, through the root hair. All right. So root hairs help to increase the surface area to allow for more absorption of water and other substances. So here's a taproot of a dicot, very nice image. Okay, we saw the dicot tube a little bit before. Here's a nice review, and then you remember that monocots generally have fibrous roots, and this here is a dicot with a nice big taproot here. Yeah. So you can tell that sometimes when you're in nature, that generally we pick the best case scenario, and it isn't always like that though. You know, sometimes you have to really look at it to make sure that you got what you think you got. Okay. So roots, yes, so inside of the root, okay? Generally, if you look at a cross-section, okay, of the root, that means that you have the root and you're slicing it, you know, like you would slice a cucumber, yeah? You have these sort of like cylindrical little slices, yeah? So if you look at a cross-section, a little bit before we were looking through a longitudinal section, or you're looking at the lengthwise of it, section, you know, in lengthwise. Now this, we're going to be looking at cross-section, sort of, okay? Inside of the root, you have something called the stele, S-T-E-L-E. That is something that's a term for what they call the vascular cylinder. Inside of the stele, okay, which is surrounded by tissue, a substance or cells known as endodermal cells, okay, you have something called a Casparian strip. This Casparian strip is sort of like a substance that doesn't allow water to leak out very much, okay? Then we also have a structure known as a pericycle. Now think about this. Yeah, if you follow along in your textbook, okay? We have a certain kind of root cross-section that would be appropriate to a dicot, and we have a certain kind of root cross-section that's appropriate to a monocot, okay? So can you think about that, right, for a minute? Then here we go, okay? Dicot, monocot. So generally, a dicot cross-section will have this kind of look to it, okay, of a root. This is a dicot root cross-section, yeah? So of course you'll have the epidermal cells and etc. This area here, surrounded by these cells here, this is the stele, the vascular cylinder. Now inside here, these large cells, yeah, that tend to have kind of reddish cell walls, and this would be the xylem cells inside of this dicot root, okay? Oftentimes they do form this kind of cross-shaped sort of structure. Sometimes they would actually have only 3 arms, and sometimes you only have 2. But generally the xylem is the innermost part, okay? Then this kind of area where the greenish stained cells are, these are, what do you call that? Phloem cells, okay? These are phloem cells here, including the, the sieve tube members and the companion cells. Okay, so this is a typical cross-section of a dicot root, okay? All right? Now here, we have another image, and so you can see here, so this is a cross-section, I think, of an orchid root, yeah? And now this orchid root is pretty interesting because you can see all these layers of these cells here. This is something we're going to look at in a little bit, and this is called velamen. You know, when you're looking at an epiphytic orchid, you know, like the dendrobiums and the cattleyas and such, a lot of which grow very well in Hawaii, they have this kind of whitish coating on it. It's called velamen. People think that maybe the velamen might function in helping the plant absorb more water in the root, you know, because these plants in nature are epiphytes. They live on top of trees. How they get their water is that they just get whatever ambient rainfall they happen to have, okay? Anyway, looking at this within this vascular cylinder. So here's the vascular cylinder inside this monocot. And generally, these cells here, okay, these areas here with the holes in them, they look like large cells, yeah? This is xylem cells here, okay, xylem. And between them, you'll have the phloem, okay? So you can see that, you can tell the difference between a dicot and a monocot root cross-section just by looking at that. Yeah, you have the little 4-parted or 3-parted or 2-parted xylem area with the phloem between them. And in the monocot, you'll have individual, you know, xylem cells, and also between them, you'll have the phloem between the xylem cells, okay, in a monocot. Alrighty. Okay, now we also have different kind of root adaptations. Okay, okay, including a root adaptation known as what we call adventitious roots, all right? Let's see, if we can, let's see, go to the Elmo, we can try to see that here, okay? So you see, this is actually a plant that I've managed to keep alive for several years. It's still alive. And what you see here, that here, this part on the stem, okay, you have these roots growing out of it. Adventitious roots are just roots that are growing from places that you might not expect a root to grow from. So you usually expect a root to grow from the bottom of a stem, not along the whole stem, yeah? But here we have adventitious roots, okay, here, along there, yes? So adventitious roots are roots that grow along places that you might not expect a root to grow, all right? So that's one kind of root adaptation. Now another kind of root adaptation is known as aerial roots, okay? And this here are some aerial roots, also known as prop roots of hala, yeah, pandanus, yeah? Pandanus tinctorius, also known as hala. It is a plant that is both native Hawaiian plant, it is actually native to Hawaii, and also Polynesian people also brought it with them too, other varieties. Okay, so hala, very important in terms of early culture in Hawaii, all right? And another thing that we are going to look at in a second, okay, we're actually going to look at an orchid plant. Okay, so here we go. We have here an orchid plant with its nice aerial roots. You can see that it has this kind of whitish substance on top of the root known as velamen, yeah? So orchids, this type of orchid, this is probably an orchid hybrid, probably a Brassia hybrid. So this kind of orchid actually in the wild would have grown on top of a tree, would have been nestled in the tree crook of a tree branch or something like that. So this kind of root is actually an adaptation to growing high above the ground. So what would be the benefit of being an epiphyte? A benefit of being an epiphyte or growing on top of a plant is because in tropical forests, like I think this is probably, I think it's native to the Americas, this group of kind of orchids. Anyway, so what the competition is for in a tropical forest is they're actually competing for light. They're not competing for water, because water is pretty abundant in tropical rainforests. But generally what the plant wants to do, it wants to get up there, way up in the tree canopy so it can get light. Because even though these plants do live upon other trees, they don't actually fasten the roots into the tree to take out any sustenance, okay? And you can see here that the leaves are green, so it does photosynthesis, right? So here, nice orchid, yep, with the velamen. And oftentimes, another adaptation that orchid roots have is oftentimes, if the root is healthy, if the plant is very healthy and it's growing well, the tips of the root will be green. Yeah, and you'll notice sometimes if you grow orchids or your parents grow orchids, when you're watering the plants, and you'll often see that when the water is hitting the root, it turns like a light greenish color. They've actually done studies that show that if you're growing an orchid plant where the roots can actually be exposed to the sun, they'll actually have bigger flowers or more flowers. Because if the roots can do photosynthesis, like these orchid roots, some of them can, you can actually do more photosynthesis, make more sugar, the plant gets bigger, the flower gets bigger, or it actually throws more flowers. As I understand it, I believe I came across that in terms of somebody telling me that, you know? Okay, right. Okay, so orchid growing, very important, okay? And then here, we also have other root adaptations, such as prop roots, okay? Prop roots, such as in corn, yeah, also in hala, like we just saw. And here we have a nice image of roots that they call buttress roots. Now, why would they have that? They would also have prop roots in plants from tropical areas, such as, we said, as pandanus or hala, okay? Well, what happens is that in certain areas, like in the tropical rainforest, the soils are actually very shallow. The nutrients tend to be located in just a few feet from the top of the soil. So that's why in tropical areas, most of the nutrients are near the top of the soil. So usually in a lot of tropical areas, the roots are shallow, okay? So what happens with these plants with the buttress roots is they actually have adapted to that situation. So they'll provide these for support. It helps to keep the plant up. Yeah, because if it doesn't go as deep, you know, like in a deciduous forest, you might expect the root, if the plant was this tall, the roots to be about the same length. Yes, that's what they usually show when they're showing a profile of a tree, like when you're going to use it in a landscape. Generally, I'm just saying that generally a tropical plant, in some places, if the tree is only this big, is this big too, the roots might only be this shallow. So generally the roots are comparatively shallow in the soil, because the reason why is that tropical soils are nutrient deficient in some ways. Why is that? Because it's warm, because it's humid. Yeah, so when that happens, you have more bacteria, you have more fungi. And what do these do? They will actually break down any organic material that are in the soil really fast. That's why usually tropical soils are not that productive, or they're not really that. They're actually don't have really lots of nutrients. I actually had a student, I think she was from North Carolina. She said that, maybe South Carolina, but she said that if she wanted to go get some nice topsoil to put in her garden or something, she just drive a truck up into the hills, dig, and as much as she wants, fill up the truck and take truckloads of good topsoil, from the hills. And that's because in a temperate area, generally the soils tend to be very deep and very nutritious because it's colder there. The organic substances don't break up or break down as quickly or as much as in tropical areas due to the fact of humidity and heat. Yep, that's two things that you can kind of count on in terms of tropical areas. Now another adaptation that roots have made is that you have storage roots, such as, we have that little illustration of a carrot, very nice illustration of a carrot, and we also have other kinds of storage roots as well. Okay, so here we have a couple of storage roots, and this one is actually, these are the one on the left, this kind of whitish colored one, is a Japanese or Chinese radish. It's also known as daikon. If you go to the market and you buy some takuan, which is a pickled radish, this is what they make it out of. And I think if you go to a sushi bar or places where they're serving sashimi, raw fish, what they'll do is they'll have a bit of this grated on the side, and they usually put, maybe they'll put it too in shoyu, when they're serving you, or when you get your shoyu for your sushi. And this, I know sometimes in some supermarkets they label it as yam, but this is a sweet potato, also known as uala, also known as ipomia batatas. So this is daikon, and here is a sweet potato. I guess they call it a red garnet yam, but it is not a yam. I know this personally because I have actually done vegetative propagation with it. Okay. So what you can do is you can actually cut that up. If you wanted to, you could take that tuberous root, so both the daikon and the yam, the sweet potato is actually a storage root. They will store fluids, it will store carbohydrates in there for when the plant needs it later on. This is why things like carrots and radishes and turnips, traditionally people save them for eating during the wintertime, because you could just put them downstairs in your cellar if you live in a cold area, and they'll keep all winter. You can make soup or something to tide you through, through the cold season. Another thing too is we also have reproductive roots as another root adaptation. All right, so let's see, let me get my things here. Okay, we have these little plants. I only see one, but let's see. So here, okay, looking on the Elmo here, these are what we call keiki. Keiki in Hawaiian means children or child, and so these are keiki. And what these are vegetative propagules. They're actually little baby plants that grew from the mama's plant's roots. So in this way, we were able to do asexual reproduction. So this is known as wauke, also known as Buccinettia papyrifera, also known as paper mulberry. This plant, if I was to plant it and grow it tall, and it will probably grow pretty tall within like a year or so, this is what Hawaiian people and other Polynesian people used to use to make their bark cloth, okay, known as kapa or tapa. So these plants, these wauke, are very well known for being able to be vegetatively propagated through what they call root suckers. Okay, so the plant can do asexual reproduction, okay, through its reproductive roots. So we have here wauke for one thing. Okay, we also have ulu, also known as breadfruit tree. These two different kinds of plants are very well known. They're notorious for being good to do vegetative propagation or asexual reproduction. Remember, asexual reproduction, you only have one parent. Okay, sexual reproduction, you need to have two. Yes. Okay. Okay, so we have sexual reproduction or asexual reproduction. Okay, so of course through reproductive roots, reproductive stems, reproductive leaves, you have asexual reproduction. Okay? Now another thing is that roots also have a good deal to play in something that we call symbioses. What are symbioses? Okay, sim means together, and bio, just like in biology, means life or living. So symbiosis is to live together. Okay. Now one kind of symbiosis that we know about is when you have one plant. Okay, like this is called kauna oa, also known as dodder, D-O-D-D-E-R, and this plant is a parasite. Okay, what it does, it will produce roots called haustoria, and those roots will plug in to the phloem, okay, of another plant. Remember what phloem does? Remember what phloem transports? Right? It transports organic compounds such as sugar in the plant. So parasitic plants such as this kauna oa, they will actually plug in into, like a nozzle, okay, into the phloem of another plant and suck up the sugar and live off the other plant parasitically. Okay? A parasitic sort of relationship is where one benefits and the other one does not, or is detrimental to the other plant. Another kind of symbiosis is mycorrhizae. Myco, remember, like the mycology is a study of fungi. Mycorrhizae literally means fungus root, and a mycorrhizae are a symbiotic association between a plant's roots and soil fungi. Okay, many plants really do need mycorrhizae to do their best. In fact, many native Hawaiian plants need to have a specific kind of mycorrhizae in association with it for them to grow at their best. Otherwise, they don't grow as fast, or they kind of languish, and they're not quite as healthy. So for many plants, what happens is that the fungus helps the plant absorb more water and absorb more nutrients, and in exchange, the plant provides the fungus a place to live, okay, and also provides it sugar, okay, from the photosynthesis that the plant does. Okay. Now another kind of symbiosis that happens is called root nodules. So root nodules are legumes, yes, things like beans, such as peas, such as clover and alfalfa, koa haole, even koa itself, the native koa of Hawaii. These are leguminous plants. They're in the plant family Fabaceae. What they do is they form a symbiotic association in their roots, okay, with symbiotic bacteria, blue-green algae. What do these bacteria do that are so important? Well, they do something extremely important known as nitrogen fixation. These bacteria can actually take N2, or atmospheric nitrogen, and then fix it. They will actually convert it into a form that the plant can use, whether it's ammonia or nitrites. Yes, very important, because remember, in terms of protein structure, remember proteins, very important for all the different chemical reactions in animals as well as in plants. Remember that proteins are made up of amino acids, and remember the parts of an amino acid? You have the central carbon, you have the carboxyl group, you have the amino group, you have the hydrogen, and you have an R group. So you saw the amino group is an NH3 plus usually, yes? So very essential for proteins. You need to have nitrogen. And all the nitrogen that we need to build up our muscles, to build up our keratin and other structures in our body, we get from plants, ultimately. You know, and the plants ultimately would have gotten them generally from these nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So they're very, very important. Okay? All right. Now we're going to get into the next structure that we're going to talk about. And these are called the stems. So we were working our way from the bottom to the top. Okay? So here we have stems, and what do? They help support the plant, keep it upright, keep the leaves up so the leaves can do photosynthesis, so they can harvest light energy. Another thing stems do is they function in transporting substances. Okay? They transport water from the root into the stem and into the leaves. All right? They transport sugar solution or other kind of organic compounds from where it is either made or stored to where it is either stored or used, okay, by the plant. So stems function as a way through which, you know, the plant can actually move substances in the plant. Okay? So on the stem itself, okay, you have two different components of a stem, which we're going to look at in just a second. All right? Okay, if we were to go to the Elmo, you can see here we have a green plant against a green background. Okay, one of the things you'll notice is on this little cutting of a stem, okay, you have leaves coming off the stem. Now the area that the leaves come off the stem is called a node, okay, N-O-D-E. The node of the stem is just a place on the stem where a leaf can come off, okay, so this is called a node. This is called a node here. The area between nodes is called the internode, okay? All stems have nodes and internodes. That actually is a qualifier. That's what makes a stem, okay? Recall, roots do not have nodes or internodes. Later on, we're going to see that leaves do not have nodes or internodes, but stems have nodes or internodes, okay? So here, generally you can tell, a node is a place where a leaf can come off the stem, and usually at the node, you'll have a leaf, and you'll also have a bud. I don't know if you can see that very well here, okay? But right here in the axil between this part of the leaf and the stem, there's a tiny little bud, okay? Sorry, not being able to see this very. Let's see if we can zoom in and see if we can see that. Right, yes you can. Right here, you see that little thing sticking up right in there? That's actually a bud. That's a place where potentially you could have a new stem coming out of there. Okay, very good, very good. Okay, so a quality of the stem is the node and the internode. That's what makes a stem, okay? The presence of nodes and internodes, okay? Now generally, okay, we're going to probably draw some pictures about this. So inside of the herbaceous stem, we're going to look at cross-sections again, okay? For one thing, a question we might ask is that what kind of plants, for a stem, for a stem cross-section, what kind of plant would have, actually have vascular bundles scattered? So if we can go to the Elmo right now, we can kind of make a drawing here, okay? So generally, oops, we're gonna have to go out again, zoom out, okay? One kind of stem, okay, say this is a cross-section. Cross-section is like you have the lengthwise, like slicing a cucumber or slicing eggplant, or like that. So here, okay, so this would be the lengthwise way, up and down. And here, we might have a little stem. Now, if you have a vascular bundle, so say you have a whole bunch of vascular bundles, okay, out this way, and then you have another row in here, and then you have more in here. What are vascular bundles? Remember what they are? They're veins. They're made up of xylem and phloem. So if you have a stem cross-section where you have all the vascular bundles scattered like this, such as like we're going to see in lab, zea mays or corn or sugarcane, okay, generally this is true of what the kind of plants, think about it. What kind of plants have vascular bundles scattered, right? Monocots. Okay, monocots, right, have vascular bundles scattered in the stem. Okay, because don't confuse them. Don't confuse these with the image that we were looking at for the root. We're looking at the stem now. So monocot has scattered vascular bundles. Okay, now what kind of plant has vascular bundles in a ring formation? So right now we're actually looking at, okay, so going back to the Elmo here, if you have a stem cross-section of an herbaceous stem, okay, herbaceous stem, so one would be a monocot, and this one here, where the vascular bundles are arranged in a ring formation, that would be typical of a dicot, okay? Okay, so we have monocot and dicot, two different ways the vascular bundles are arranged. Okay, very important to know the differences, as you can probably tell, because we keep on coming back to this over and over. Okay, all right, let's see. Next, okay, so we kind of took a look at the herbaceous monocot and herbaceous dicot, and when we look at a woody dicot, okay, we use the same cross section on the Elmo as we did earlier when we were looking at the bark. Well, inside of the stem, what actually comprises wood? Okay, all these little rings, you can actually see the rings on this stem cross section. Each of this corresponds to 1 year of growth. This is actually xylem. Okay, so the rings of growth inside of a woody stem is actually xylem. Okay, xylem tissues. And remember that xylem is not alive when it's functional. Okay. All right, next we're going to get into different kinds of stem adaptations, and I'm going to mostly just mention the types that you can kind of look at and kind of see for yourself. So one kind of stem adaptation that we have is called a rhizome. What is a rhizome? A rhizome is an underground horizontal stem. And remember, what makes a stem a stem? Okay, remember that you have nodes and internodes. So if you have, say, a rhizome of ginger, whether it's ornamental ginger such as white ginger, yeah, or yellow ginger, really sweet-smelling gingers, or even if you have torch ginger or red ginger or even edible ginger. Look at it in the supermarket. What do you see? They call it a ginger root. They call it a ginger root because it is mostly underground, the part that we use. But it is actually a horizontal underground stem because it does have nodes and internodes. The little lines between the different sections, those are the nodes where the buds can form, okay? So rhizome, good example is ginger, okay? Stolon, we already took a look at the stolon. Let's see if I can find it. Alrighty, okay, here it is. Okay, we have on the elmo, here we have an example of a stolon. We have a grass stolon here. I'm not sure what kind of grass this is, but still, what it is, it's a horizontal stem where you can get more plants coming off it, but this is a horizontal above ground stem. Okay, so this part is actually above the surface of the ground, okay? We also have another kind of underground stem that people sometimes call a root, and that's called a corm, C-O-R-M. Okay, and the kind that we sort of saw, we didn't really see it, but we talked about it, is a corm of kalo. Yeah, taro or kalo, Colocasia esculenta. The part that people use to make poi with is actually a vertical underground stem. That is actually a stem. It's not a root, even though people call it a root. It's not really literally a root. Then another type that we've actually seen, okay, here we have, okay, under the elmo, we have here we have a bulb of a green onion. Yeah, and this is true of round onion as well. This is another good example also of monocot roots. You can see that the roots are very fibrous. You can see that they're all about the same size. Okay, so green onion, okay, a very good example of not just a bulb, which is a root adaptation. What is a bulb? A bulb means that generally this very small part, this part here is actually the stem. All the above part, the green part of it, and even some of this fleshy white part is actually a leaf. Okay, so the stem is actually in here. It's very compressed, very tight, and from there you have the leaves growing from. Okay, lastly we have the tuber. Okay, the tuber, a good example of that, of course, is the white potato or Irish potato or Peruvian potato. That is actually a horizontal underground stem that is swollen and full of starch. Okay, that's what they call a tuber. Let's see, how can you tell that it's a stem and not a root? Well, and how can you tell that a sweet potato is actually a root and not a stem? Okay, so here we have the fact that the tuber, okay, a tuber actually, such as a potato, okay, a white potato, actually has those so-called eyes on it, yeah? The places where their eyes are, those are actually the nodes, okay, on the potato. So a potato is actually a stem, okay, even though you might think of it as being like a root, okay? All right, so another kind of adaptation that stems can have includes storage. Okay, we saw that in the cactus we looked at before. Remember a few lectures ago? We also have the fact that some stems you can do reproduction from with. I'm sorry, you can actually do a new cutting from. So here, okay, here, also on the elmo here, we have, okay, we have part of a stem of a tea plant. Okay, this is tea leaf. Yeah, it's an ornamental tea. And I just came upon there. One of the things you can see is from the stem, it's a stem cutting, you have these calluses forming. What happens is that at the cells here, at the nodes, remember this is a stem, at each of these represents a node, you'll have tissues. It's called a callus, C-A-L-L-U-S. What that is, that's undifferentiated tissue. Okay, so what happens is that the stem tissue will de-differentiate to form the callus, and then they will re-differentiate to form these roots. So when you have a cutting of certain plants, you can do asexual reproduction from them. And of course, tea or key is notorious for that. It's supposed to be really easy to do that. You can just cut them, stick them in the ground, and usually they'll grow, just as long as they have enough light. Yes? Okay, another thing that we've seen before too, and you can see that also in the tea leaf, is that some plants actually have green stems, like in this tea. You can see that along the stem here on the alamo, that you actually do have green sections on it, and so these green sections will allow the stem to do photosynthesis. Okay, so a lot of plants can do that too, including, of course, cacti as well. Okay, let's see. Alrighty. Now, we're going to try to continue, and we're going to get into leaves a little bit. Okay, so what do leaves do? Of course, they do that very world famous sort of process known as photosynthesis, which even now people consider almost as a miracle. Did you know that no scientist has been able to reproduce photosynthesis in the lab? Only plants and algae and blue-green bacteria can do it. They haven't been able to actually do it artificially, okay? Now, in terms of the plant, okay, what actually comprises the leaf? Okay, so if we were to look at a particular leaf, okay, like we have here on the Elmo, we have here a leaf of a plant known as ava, okay, also known as kava kava. So in terms of the leaf, what are the structures? Okay, first of all, you have this part of the leaf. This is known as a blade, B-L-A-D-E, okay? This part of the leaf, known as a blade, is usually the part that does most of the photosynthesis in the leaf. The next part of the leaf is also known as a petiole, P-E-T-I-O-L-E. Okay, so we have a blade and we have the petiole. Those are the two main external features of the leaf itself. Okay, this is kind of dark a little bit. Yeah. Alrighty. Anyway, so on the leaf, okay, blade and petiole, two main parts of the leaf. Okay, and let's see, leaf arrangement. Leaf arrangement includes several types. Okay, so here we'll have illustration drawn of this, and next time I'll have some examples for you to see, right? So there's three main types of leaf arrangement, okay? So if this were a stem, and this were a stem, and this were a stem, three different stems, line drawing, and you have a stem that has only one leaf coming off from each node. Remember, a node is a place on the stem where the leaves can come off of? So this is called an alternate leaf arrangement. Okay, you can remember, leaf alternate, one side, then the other side, then the other side. Generally, an alternate leaf arrangement is a result when you actually have only one leaf per node. Okay, now if you look at another kind of leaf arrangement, you'll have two leaves per node. Okay, and this kind of leaf arrangement is called opposite leaf arrangement. You can remember that usually, like in the family known as Rubiaceae, you'll have the leaves one on one side, one on the other, one on one side, one on the other. So they're opposite each other. Okay, so we have alternate leaf arrangement, we have opposite leaf arrangement. Now the third kind of leaf arrangement that we need to talk about is called a whorled leaf arrangement. What that is generally is when you have three leaves coming off of one node. Okay? So we talked about leaf arrangement, okay? Alternate leaf arrangement, opposite leaf arrangement, and whorled leaf arrangement, okay? Okay, so three different types of leaf arrangement. And next time I will probably have samples for you folks to look at, okay? All right, let's see. Okay, anyway, so what we're gonna do, okay, is we're going to, okay, do the summary, okay? So we started on some things, including that roots, what do they function in? Their main functions have to do with anchorage and absorption, main thing that roots do, and they have secondary functions as well. Yes, reproduction, in some cases photosynthesis. Stems actually function in supporting the leaves and also function in transporting materials inside, and then we have the leaves that do photosynthesis. Okay, that's all we have time for today, but I'm looking forward to seeing you again, and we'll continue with the plant body. Thank you. See you later.